Chapter 7. The Culling. Earlier in the day, in this very garden, it had taken every ounce of her focus to see the threads of power springing from a single lily cupped in her aunt's palms, to touch the energy trapped in its delicate petals. Now, seeing her home burn, Vesper didn't think. She reacted. Vesper drank in a torrent of power from the remnants of her aunt's vast garden and then, in a rush, she vanished, riding the thread that connected to the massive baobab tree at the heart of their now burning village. In the span of a single breath, Vesper appeared at the base of the great tree, expecting to be alone among its exposed roots, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was going on. To her shock, she came upon a small group of men with torches trying to set the roots of the baobab on fire. They were like no other people she'd ever seen, tall and heavyset, thick through the middle. Their dark skin and faces were covered in white markings, each of them having a pair of bleached horns curving down the sides of their heads, making them appear demonic. It took her a moment to realize they were animal bones of some kind, and they painted themselves with the intent to frighten, to terrorize. "Kill her," one of them shouted, and with a start, she realized they had seen her. Two of them men peeled off from the others, stalking toward her while brandishing wicked-looking spears capped with metal tips stained red. Vesper backed away, her hand outstretched protectively in front of her while her stomach twisted in knots. The pair of men came closer and she could almost feel the hate and anger rolling off them in waves. One of the men raised his spear to hurl it at her and the world around her seemed to slow to a crawl. Even in the dark she could see the flex of his shoulders as he pulled back, the ripple of the muscles under his skin. Vesper knew he was about to kill her without a second thought, and she realized she deserved it. She had promised her aunt only a few minutes ago, on a hill overlooking the city of Rome, that she would stop being foolish, that she would be better, and now she had done just the opposite, charging headlong into danger without a thought of what might be going on, or if she could be hurt. She tensed as the spear left the man's hand, flying fast toward her breast. For a heartbeat she was sure that it was over, and that her short life had been for nothing. But as the weapon flew toward her it pivoted as if struck by something, its wickedly sharp tip going wide, and instead of tearing through her chest, it grazed her upper arm, leaving a bloody gash that sent waves of pain through her and knocking her to the ground. Vesper landed with a grunt on a thick root, her head bouncing off the unyielding wood. Groaning at the stinging on her arm, she fought back against a wave of nausea and dizziness that threatened to make her stomach spill its contents as she struggled to get back on her feet. Blinking away the pain in her head, Vesper turned to face her attackers and her jaw fell open. Magda, her small round-bodied aunt, was standing at the center of the men with the painted faces. Her normally kind face and warm smile were gone. Her kindness replaced by a look of fierce determination and a snarl of anger that made Vesper terrified and proud all at once. The older woman had managed somehow to tear away a spear from one of the men, who now lay against a root, clutching at a dark stain on his belly. Vesper watched in awe as the older woman spun the weapon faster than she thought possible, using it to defend and attack all at once. In one moment she deflected a series of short vicious jabs that came in high and low, then with the men's weapons knocked wide, she slammed the butt of the weapon into one's throat before spinning it around again and using it like a sword to slash another's belly wide open, spilling the man's guts to the ground. Magda then twisted around again, ducking to avoid a wild swing and then burying the tip of the spear into one of her attacker's calves, sending him reeling back, clutching at the pain in his leg, before reversing her grip to slam it into the groin of a warrior whose spear was raised over his head to strike her down. To Vesper's surprise, the last man fighting turned on his heel, screaming in a strange tongue that she didn't understand while bounding away like a gazelle desperate to outrun a cheetah. Her aunt, undeterred, didn't waste a moment, hefting the spear over her shoulder, and then hurling the spear in a single, smooth motion. Vesper winced, her eyes flying open when the powerful throw pierced the warrior's back, sending him tumbling like a puppet whose strings had been cut, his dying body twitching in the dirt. Vesper opened her mouth to speak, but her aunt silenced her with a look. "You stupid girl," she seethed, the thick braids framing her face shaking with rage as she stormed toward her. "You just finished promising me you would stop this foolishness, this running before you can walk. Why must you risk everything I have worked for my entire life?" "I'm sorry. I just wanted to help," said Vesper, angry at hearing her own thoughts thrown back at her. "I thought, no. You did not think. You leapt off like a child, without a single notion of what was happening. You have so much potential, more than anyone I have ever met, yet you squander it like some Roman spilling wine." "Auntie, Look out." Vesper caught a flicker of movement behind her aunt, almost like an afterimage of looking at the sun too long. Without thinking she hurled herself at her aunt, every muscle straining while she wrapped her arms around her waist and pushed her to one side. The weapon hissed like a serpent as it passed a hair's breadth from her ear, the sharp, coppery taste of fear filling her mouth as she landed on top of her aunt, who squirmed and punched like a trapped animal beneath her. "Get off me, you fool." Vesper flushed with embarrassment, her cheeks growing warm as she rolled off Magda. Her eyes widened when she found a limping warrior above them. He brandished a short, curved blade, and his eyes burned with hatred. The weapon came down, and Vesper closed her eyes, raising her hands protectively over her face and bracing for the blow that would end her life. The blow never came, and she nervously squeezed open one eye and found that somehow. The warrior was frozen in place, his entire body locked in the motion of bringing down his sword. She looked to find her aunt with an outstretched hand, her chest rising and falling like she had just run a race, nostrils flaring. "What happened?" asked Vesper, swallowing hard. "Take the weapon from his hand, now," commanded her aunt. Vesper pried the weapon loose from the man's iron grip, looking for any hint that he would attack again. But the way his eyes darted in all directions, she could tell he was terrified and still aware, but his body was no longer under his control. "What did you do?" she whispered, her eyes flickering back and forth from her aunt to the warrior. "Now is not the time for questions," said her aunt in a strained voice. "Take the sword and put it in his belly. Quickly. Who knows how many more of them are in the village?" Vesper gasped, swallowing hard. Looking into his eyes, she could see he understood, and part of her could sense his fear. He didn't want to die, not like this, like an animal caught in a trap. "I can't," she said, her body shaking. "Can't we just, put him to sleep or something?" Magda's eyes drew together, and her nostrils flared as a shadow of disappointment flickered over her face. "He would end your life without a thought," said her aunt, slowly getting to her feet and taking the blade from her hand. "His blade is stained with the blood of our people." "I can't," Vesper whispered, pulling back. She had never hurt anyone, at least not on purpose. She was squeamish even when killing chickens or goats, and the idea of killing a man, even one who would have killed her, did not sit well in her heart. "His kind. The Sandaway. They have been our enemies since the dawn of time. Look in his eyes, even now he hates us, fears us. How many men, how many women and children has he taken from us, all for a hatred long forgotten?" Magda asked, using his own blade to carve thin lines of blood across his chest. "Don't we need to be better than our enemies?" asked Vesper, not sure why she was arguing for the life of a man who had just tried to kill her. "I mean, in the heat of battle, in fair combat, yes," to kill makes sense. But like this, when he is helpless, those who show mercy to their enemies do so only to die later, on their blades, Magda replied. I am not so foolish, and you should not be either. Vesper opened her mouth to protest, to say there was a better way, when the man's eyes went wide as her aunt plunged the sword into his stomach, twisting the blade with a feral grin on her face. With a growl, she roughly pulled the blade out, holding the weapon up so that Vesper could see the blood on it. Look at it, said her aunt in a voice that brooked no argument. It is your duty to protect your people. You must never hesitate, ever. Or one day, it will be your blood, or the blood of someone you love on the end of a blade. Understood? Yes, Auntie. Vesper said, bowing her head in shame. Now, come. Lives are depending on our swiftness. Her aunt turned and raced ahead, leaving Vesper to watch the fallen Sandaway warrior bleed out on the dirt, clutching at his spilled innards. Looking into his pained face, her gaze shifted without thought, and she found herself watching the threads of his life fade away. The energy pulsing through him was like the lily from the garden, only so much more. Where the lily was a simple glowing ball of light, he was far more complicated. Now that she knew how to look and what to look for, even as his life faded, Vesper could trace 1,000 lines of power splaying in all directions, connecting him to the greater world. Up above in the tapestry of night she could see those that touched him, those he loved, his wife, children, even friends. This was a man with a life who was part of the greater pattern that made up the world. And he was in pain, more pain than she could imagine. Vesper hesitated for a moment, then as if in a dream, she reached out with a trembling hand, clutching at the weak remnants of his life, just like she'd done with the lily, drawing it into her. She gasped, her head falling back as a rush of strength flooded into her limbs. She suddenly felt like she was standing under the blazing noon sun, blinded by its brightness. To her amazement she felt stronger, and was sure that she could leap to the heavens and touch the stars, or outrun a gazelle. Vesper, shouted her aunt in the distance. Stop dragging your feet in the dirt, and stay close to me. With a start she came back to herself, choking smoke filling her nostrils, orange and red flames flickering in the distance. At her feet, the Sandaway warrior, with his white painted face and cruel-looking tusks affixed to the side of his head, had stopped moving, his life ended with a pitiful gasp, the brilliance that she saw only a moment ago gone. What she had taken from him, the ace that was his life, was still coursing through her, and was far more invigorating than the plants she had touched. Far more. She felt all the stronger for it. And deep down inside, there was a hollow ache in her belly that wasn't there before. Her aunt screamed after her and Vesper pushed the feeling aside, wondering what the hell she'd just done.